The sun was rising in Seattle as Nathan observed the city through the window of his small apartment. The first lights of day painted the sky in shades of pink and orange, but inside him, a persistent shadow obscured any glimpse of hope. As an architect who had graduated 5 years ago, his routine at the office where he worked had transformed into an invisible prison. Each project he developed carried the mark of mediocrity, not for lack of talent, but due to the fear that prevented him from daring, creating, flying. On that specific morning, something was different. While preparing his coffee, Nathan found himself observing his reflection in the kitchen window. Who was that person staring back at him? The tired eyes, the slumped shoulders, the expression of resignation, all of this seemed to belong to someone much older, someone who had given up on their dreams long ago. It was at this moment that a question arose in his mind like a distant whisper. How did I get here? The truth is that Nathan was not alone in his journey of questioning. In psychologists' offices, coaching sessions, and intimate conversations between friends, thousands of people daily share the same feeling of stagnation. Dr. Thomas Hawkins, in his pioneering work on neuroplasticity, points out that this feeling of paralysis has deep roots in our neurological patterns. According to him, our thoughts are not just passive reflections of reality, they are active architects of our life experience. Nathan's story invites us to a deeper reflection on how our thoughts shape our reality. Neuroscientist Emily Carter, in her studies on perception, demonstrates that the human brain processes about 11 million bits of information per second, but we are only conscious of 40 bits. This means that much of our decisions and behaviors are guided by subconscious patterns we establish throughout life. But what happens when these patterns, instead of propelling us forward, begin to imprison us? Nathan's case perfectly illustrates how limiting beliefs can crystallize in our mind, creating a reality that reflects our deepest fears. Each morning he woke up to go to work, each project he developed without enthusiasm, each dream he postponed. All of this reinforced a cycle of negative self-perception. Modern neuroscience shows us that the human brain possesses an extraordinary characteristic called neuroplasticity, the ability to reorganize, form new connections, and modify existing patterns. This revolutionary discovery, highlighted by Dr. Sarah Johnson in The Transforming Brain, reveals that we are not prisoners of our mental patterns. Just as an architect can reshape a project, we can redesign the neural circuits that dictate our life experience. As the day progressed, Nathan began to realize that his feeling of stagnation was not an inevitable fate, but rather a temporary state, a state that could be transformed. This understanding, although initial, was like a small crack of light penetrating years of darkness. The first step for any transformation is the recognition that it is possible. On a Thursday afternoon, during a coffee with his friend Michael, a neuroscientist at the University Medical Center, Nathan had his first glimpse of what could be the key to his transformation. Between sips of espresso and conversations about life, Michael began to explain how the human brain processes reality and creates our everyday experiences. You know, Nathan, the most interesting thing about the human brain is that it doesn't distinguish between a real experience and a vividly imagined one, explained Michael, his eyes shining with the enthusiasm of someone sharing a precious discovery. When you visualize something with clarity and emotion, your brain activates the same neural circuits that would be activated if you were actually living that experience. This revelation hit Nathan like a ray of clarity amidst the fog of his thoughts. Michael continued explaining, citing a revolutionary study conducted at Stanford University, where a group of volunteers was divided into 3 teams for an experiment on musical learning. The first group physically practiced a piano sequence for 5 days. The second group only visualized the practice, imagining their fingers pressing the keys in the correct sequence. The third group neither practiced nor visualized. The results were surprising. While the group that neither practiced nor visualized showed no change, the group that physically practiced showed a significant increase in neural connections related to finger movement. But what really caught attention was that the group that only visualized the practice developed practically the same neural connections as the group that physically practiced. It's as if our brain were an extremely sophisticated movie projector, explained Michael. It not only reproduces images, but creates a whole complete sensory experience. When you visualize something with enough intensity, your brain begins to create new neural connections, as if that were already happening. This conversation triggered a series of reflections in Nathan. If his brain didn't distinguish between reality and vivid imagination, it meant that his constant fears and insecurities were effectively programming his brain for failure. Each time he imagined failing, each moment of doubt about his ability, each thought of "I'm not good enough," all of this was creating and reinforcing neural connections that sustained this limiting reality. Dr. Rachel Foster, in her pioneering work on cell biology and epigenetics, demonstrated that our beliefs and perceptions have the power to alter even the expression of our genes. It's not just our thoughts that change, but our very biology responds to the way we perceive and interpret our reality. As the afternoon progressed and the conversation deepened, Nathan began to understand that there was a solid scientific basis for something that always seemed just superficial positive thinking. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to form new connections and reorganize existing circuits, offered a scientific explanation for how we could literally reprogram our mind for new patterns of thought and behavior. Michael shared more recent studies on how visualization and meditation practices can alter the physical structure of the brain. Researchers at the University of California, Berkeley, led by Dr. Lisa Thompson, discovered that long-term meditation practitioners showed significant changes in areas of the brain related to attention, emotional processing, and decision-making. The most incredible thing, said Michael, is that these changes begin to happen much faster than we previously imagined. In just 8 weeks of consistent practice, it's already possible to observe measurable changes in brain structure. This information was like a key that unlocked something inside Nathan. If 8 weeks of conscious practice could begin to reshape the brain, what would be possible to achieve with a true commitment to transformation? The idea that he could effectively reprogram his mind for success was no longer just an abstract concept. It was a real possibility, grounded in solid scientific research. The morning following his conversation with Michael marked the beginning of a new phase in Nathan's life. It was still dark when his alarm went off at 5:30, an hour earlier than his usual schedule. Following the guidance of his neuroscientist friend, he had decided to dedicate the first hour of each day to actively reprogramming his mind. Seated in his favorite armchair with a steaming cup of green tea by his side, Nathan closed his eyes and began the process that would change his life. At first, it seemed strange and even a bit artificial. How could the simple act of visualizing make any real difference? But he remembered the words of Eckhart Tolle, "The present moment is all we have. Make the now the primary focus of your life." Following a script he had drafted the night before, Nathan began to mentally construct his ideal office. It wasn't just a superficial visualization. He focused on every sensory detail: the aroma of freshly brewed coffee in the kitchenette, the soft sound of air conditioning, the texture of the work desk under his fingers, the natural light streaming through the large windows. Most importantly, he allowed himself to feel the emotions associated with this scenario: the confidence in presenting projects to clients, the satisfaction of leading his own team, the pride of seeing his creations taking shape in the city. Dr. Thomas Hawkins, in his studies on mental transformation, emphasizes that it's not enough to just visualize. One must generate and maintain the desired emotional state. When we combine focused thoughts with elevated emotions, Hawkins explains, we create a state of being that begins to modify our biological and energetic reality. In the first weeks, Nathan faced significant challenges. His mind, accustomed to wandering through scenarios of worry and doubt, resisted the new programming. Intrusive thoughts arose. This is a waste of time. You're fooling yourself. Things will never change. But he had learned from Dr. Lisa Thompson, a pioneer in studies on growth mindset, that these resistances were normal and even expected. They were just the old neural patterns struggling to maintain their dominance. To overcome these resistances, Nathan implemented a technique he called sensory anchoring. In addition to morning visualization, he began to create small rituals throughout the day that reinforced his new mental state. When he arrived at work, he consciously adopted the body posture of someone confident and successful. During meetings, he modulated his voice to reflect the authority he wished to emanate. In his interactions, he practiced active listening and assertive communication that he imagined in his future office. Dr. Maxwell Roberts, in his pioneering work on self-image, stated that it takes at least 21 days to form a new mental habit. Nathan discovered that, although changes began to appear during this period, the transformation process was deeper and continuous. Each morning of practice, each moment of conscious anchoring during the day, was like adding a new layer of paint to a canvas. Gradually, the new image was becoming more vivid and real. A crucial aspect of his practice was what he called the evidence journal. Every night before going to bed, he recorded small signs of change in his life: an unexpected compliment from a colleague, an innovative idea that emerged during a project, a moment of courage when he took a stand in a meeting. This record served not only as motivation, but as tangible proof that his mind was actually reprogramming itself. As he completed his first month of practice, Nathan began to notice subtle but significant changes in his daily life. His project presentations had become more confident. His ideas, previously timidly kept to himself, began to flow more naturally in meetings. More importantly, the constant feeling of inadequacy was beginning to give way to a growing sense of possibility and potential. It was a seemingly ordinary Tuesday when Nathan faced his first big test. His boss had called an extraordinary meeting to present a new project, a public library that would be the city's calling card. Initially, the project would be led by a senior architect, but an unforeseen event opened up an unexpected opportunity. "We need someone who can take the lead on this project immediately," announced the boss, his eyes scanning the meeting room. "It's a unique opportunity and a big challenge." The old Nathan would have shrunk in his chair, waiting for someone more experienced to speak up, but something had changed. The weeks of conscious practice had created new connections in his brain, new response patterns. Before fear could paralyze him, Nathan found himself raising his hand. "I'd like to lead this project," he said, his firm voice reflecting the confidence he had been cultivating in his morning visualizations. The silence that followed was deafening. His colleagues looked at him with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. His boss, after a moment of consideration, nodded. "It wasn't exactly who I had in mind," admitted the boss, "but I've noticed changes in your work in recent weeks. You'll have a week to present an initial concept." That night, alone in his apartment, Nathan faced his first real crisis of doubt since beginning his transformation journey. It was one thing to visualize success in his comfortable armchair, quite another to face a challenge of this magnitude in the real world. Dr. Martin Sullivan, father of positive psychology, calls these moments confrontations with reality. They are what test and strengthen our new mindset. Instead of succumbing to panic, Nathan resorted to the techniques he had practiced. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply, accessing the mental state of confidence and creativity he had cultivated in his morning practices. Then he took his notebook and began to sketch ideas, allowing his mind to flow freely. The library that began to take shape on his paper wasn't just a building. It was a bridge between the city's past and future. Inspired by his studies on neuroplasticity, Nathan conceived a space that would stimulate different forms of learning and connection. Areas of absolute silence alternated with spaces for creative collaboration. Natural light was harnessed in innovative ways to create environments that promoted both concentration and inspiration. During the week that followed, Nathan lived his project intensely. His mornings started even earlier at 5 a.m., allowing him to dedicate time to both his visualization practice and project development. His visualizations now included specific details of the presentation he would make, the confidence in his voice, the clarity of his explanations, the assured responses to questions that would arise. On the day of the presentation, something extraordinary happened. When Nathan stood up to present his concept, he wasn't just showing a project, he was sharing a vision. His voice didn't tremble. His hands didn't sweat. It was as if all the mental reprogramming work of the past weeks had converged for this moment. The silence that followed his presentation was different from that of the previous meeting. It was a silence of admiration. His boss was the first to speak. "This is extraordinary, Nathan. It's not just a library, it's a statement about the future of our city." This moment marked a decisive turning point, not only in the project, but in Nathan's life. The external reality was finally beginning to align with the internal reality he had been cultivating. As Dr. Thomas Hawkins teaches, when our thoughts and emotions align with our actions, we create a new state of being that attracts new possibilities. The success with the library project was just the beginning. In the months that followed, Nathan observed a fundamental shift in how people responded to him. Colleagues who previously barely noticed his presence now sought his opinion. Clients began to specifically request his participation in their meetings. But the most significant transformation was happening at a deeper level. Nathan realized that he wasn't just acting differently, he was being different. Dr. Rachel Foster, in her studies on epigenetics, explains that when we consistently change our thought and behavior patterns, we alter even the expression of our genes. Our biology responds to our consciousness. One afternoon, while reviewing his evidence journal, Nathan noticed an interesting pattern. The changes in his professional life had triggered transformations in other areas. His more confident posture at work had translated into more authentic personal relationships. His renewed creativity in project design began to manifest in other aspects of his life, from the decoration of his apartment to the way he dressed. Neuroscientist Dr. Emily Carter highlights in her research that when we establish new neural patterns in one area of life, they tend to influence other domains through a phenomenon known as neural transfer. This was exactly what Nathan was experiencing, a holistic transformation that transcended the initial boundaries of his visualizations. It was a rainy Thursday when Nathan made the decision that would definitively change the course of his life. Sitting in his office, observing the city through the foggy window, he knew it was time. The visualizations he practiced every morning were no longer just mental exercises. They had become a calling he could no longer ignore. With a mixture of excitement and apprehension, he drafted his resignation letter. Unlike the paralyzing fear he used to feel when thinking about this possibility, now there was a calm certainty guiding his actions. As Eckhart Tolle teaches, fear arises when we disconnect from the present moment and project anxieties into the future. Nathan had learned to anchor himself in the now, trusting in the process that had transformed his mind and, consequently, his reality. The decision to open his own architecture firm was not met with surprise by those around him. In recent months, his colleagues and clients had witnessed his metamorphosis. "You're no longer the same Nathan," commented his boss upon receiving the news. "In fact, we were wondering how long it would take for you to take this step." The first days as an entrepreneur were a real test of everything he had learned about mental reprogramming. Each challenge, from finding the perfect space for the office to making the first commercial proposals, was an opportunity to apply his visualization practices in real time. 6 months after opening his office, Nathan found himself in a situation he would never have imagined a year ago. His architecture studio, initially a modest space in a commercial building, had already gained a solid reputation in the city. But what surprised him most wasn't the successful projects or financial growth. It was the impact his transformation was having on the people around him. It all started when Olivia, a young architect who had joined his team, asked during a breakfast, "How did you do it, Nathan? How did you manage to get out of where you were and create all this?" The question caught him off guard. For the first time, Nathan found himself on the other side of the equation, no longer as someone seeking transformation, but as someone capable of inspiring it in others. That morning, Nathan shared with Olivia his journey of mental reprogramming. He explained about the morning visualizations, the importance of consistency, the scientific basis behind the process. To his surprise, Olivia didn't just show interest. She began implementing the practices in her own life. Dr. Nicholas Roberts, in his research on social networks, demonstrated that behaviors and emotional states can propagate through social groups like waves in a lake. Nathan was witnessing this phenomenon firsthand. Olivia began to change, and her transformation inspired other team members. In a few weeks, the office had transformed into a living laboratory of personal and professional growth. The morning meetings, which were previously purely technical, now included moments of sharing and reflection. The energy of the environment was palpable. Every person there was not just designing buildings, but redesigning their own realities. One of the most significant projects emerged when a client, impressed with the unique atmosphere of the office, suggested creating a co-working space that incorporated neuroscience-based design principles. "We want an environment that not only houses people, but transforms them," explained the client. This project became a perfect symbol of the multiplying power of personal transformation. Nathan and his team weren't just applying architectural principles, they were creating spaces that would facilitate for others the same kind of awakening he had experienced. It was a Sunday morning, exactly 1 year after that first conversation with Michael about neuroplasticity. Nathan was sitting on his balcony, watching the sunrise while savoring his coffee. His morning visualization ritual had evolved. It was no longer a practice to achieve a desired future, but a celebration of the present and a constant expansion of possibilities. His phone vibrated with a message from Michael. "I saw your interview in the architecture magazine. Who would have thought that our conversation about neuroscience would end up influencing building design?" Nathan smiled. The interview in question had been about how his office was incorporating principles of neuroscience and positive psychology into their architectural projects. Mentally reviewing the past year, Nathan realized that the true transformation wasn't in the external results, the successful office, the innovative projects, the professional recognition. The real change was in how he perceived and interacted with reality. Dr. Lisa Thompson, in her research on neuroplasticity and well-being, discovered that people who maintain consistent practices of mental transformation develop a quality she calls elevated baseline, a new normal of functioning at a higher level of consciousness and capability. This was exactly what Nathan had achieved. His old fears and insecurities hadn't simply disappeared, they had been transformed into fuel for growth. Each challenge was now seen as an opportunity for expansion, each obstacle as an invitation for innovation. His office had become more than a business. It was a center of transformation. Clients came not just in search of architectural projects, but attracted by the energy of possibility that the space emanated. The team, now with 12 people, had developed their own culture of growth and personal development. More importantly, Nathan had discovered that true mental reprogramming wasn't a destination to be reached, but a continuous journey of expansion and discovery. As Dr. Sarah Johnson teaches, consciousness is always in motion, always expanding. There is no end point, just ever deeper levels of realization. On that Sunday morning, as he planned the week ahead, Nathan reflected on how his personal transformation had become a force for change in the lives of so many people. His architectural projects now carried a unique signature, not just in their physical design, but in the transformative intention they embodied. The sun was already high in the sky when he opened his notebook to make his daily notes. On the blank page, he wrote, "The greatest discovery wasn't learning to reprogram my mind. It was realizing that in doing so, we become capable of helping others awaken to their own infinite possibilities." And so on that quiet morning, Nathan understood that his transformation journey was just beginning. Each new day brought with it the promise of more expansion, more discoveries, more possibilities to positively impact the world around him. Mental reprogramming wasn't just a technique, it was a way of life, an ongoing commitment to growth and evolution.